everyone, I am joined here today with my boyfriend Alex de Leon, who is a native Spanish speaker and fluent in both Spanish and English.
Hola, buenas tardes, mi nombre es Alex de León y estoy muy agradecido de poder ayudarte con tu proyecto. Hablo dos idiomas, inglés y español.
So Alex, would you consider yourself to have learned Spanish or English first, or did you learn both languages at once?
I would say I learned both languages at once. My dad's from Mexico, so most of my Spanish as a kid came from my dad. And my mom's from Laredo, Texas, and so most of the English that I learned as a kid came from my mom. And as well as most of my cousins spoke mostly English. So every time I would see them, every time I hung out with them, whatnot, we'll speak in English. So that helped me develop both languages at the same time as a kid.
Would you say you got your exposure before you started school, or was it something that came along as you went through school?
I would say it was a little bit before. I mean, I don't quite remember exactly, but like I said, before school, before I entered the pre-K level, my mom and dad would speak to me, everybody else, and they'll speak both languages to me. And then as we went through school, that's where I developed more of my English.
So do you think learning both languages simultaneously affected the way you learn to read and write in both Spanish and English?
Yes, it did affect it in a positive way, and I noticed it as a kid. When I went to Herrera, I noticed that there was 3 categories where they placed students. So it was all English classes, all Spanish classes, or classes where it was for students that already knew the basics, you could say, of English and Spanish, put together.
So do you think it would have affected you in any way if you would have learned, say, Spanish or English first without learning both languages? Do you think that would have affected the way you develop your language throughout school?
Yeah, of course. If I enter Herrera without knowing English and just knowing Spanish, I definitely would have consumed a lot of time trying to learn the English, you see. And when I went to Herrera, I knew the basics, of both languages. I wasn't perfectly fluent in both, but I could somewhat speak, both of them. As I went through the course of school, my English was developing, more and more, and at home my Spanish was developing more and more. But through my courses at Herrera in dual credit, I could understand the work in English. I could understand everything that I was doing, because I had that advantage that my parents gave me to learn both English and Spanish, you could say, before school started.
So as a Spanish speaker myself, since Spanish was my first language, I sometimes found myself in situations in which I would mix up my Spanish terms with English vocabulary, or vice versa. So you learn both languages together at the same time, do you ever find yourself in situations like that, or did you do that as a kid?
Yeah, even if I learned both languages at the same time, I still found myself speaking Spanglish. I still do find myself speaking Spanglish, at the time. And I think that's just due to the fact that you spend a certain amount of time just speaking one language for a period, and then you'll switch over to speaking the other language, for other certain period. But and that's just due to the environment that you're in. And so I would say that you'll forget a word here and there, if you stop speaking the language for a certain amount of time.
So with your experiences, would you make a recommendation to parents to teach their kids either Spanish or English, or at least more than one language before they enter school?
Yeah, they should. And for example, my niece, she's 2 years old, and she doesn't start school until she's 4, right? And I always tell my sister that she should know Spanish, right? But she should also know English, because that will benefit her in the long run, especially with reading. What I noticed is that when you read books in English, of course, it's harder to do it if you only learn, let's say, Spanish as a kid, and if you're learning English throughout the school, it's very hard to read the vocabulary, in English. So, I mean, that's one of the main points of why I tell her, you know, it's always good for her to have an advantage in knowing both languages, or knowing at least the basics of 2 languages before she starts school.
Thank you, Alex, for joining me and for helping me out throughout this project.
You are very welcome, Karina, y muchas gracias a ti por dejarme estar contigo en este video, y ojalá que correspondí a todas tus preguntas, y muy bonitas noches, mañanas o tardes a todos ustedes.